He turned and looked directly at her. In the middle of the courtroom, in front of the judge, in front of the gallery, in front of the stenographer whose fingers stopped moving. And he said it, loud, clear, unhurried, like a man announcing the time. "You are nothing." One beat. Then he added 4 more words, the ones that would later destroy him. "You have always been nothing. You simply had the good fortune of standing next to someone who was." The courtroom went completely still. Or not because of the words, because of what the woman sitting across the aisle did next. She did not cry, did not flinch, did not look away. She sat completely still, hands folded, and for just one unguarded second, the corner of her mouth moved, almost like a smile. And before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel, because this story is about to take a turn no one in that courtroom saw coming. Here is what nobody in that room knew yet. She had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. And somewhere outside that building, already on her way, was the single person on earth capable of turning everything Conrad Ashby had built to ash. He arrived that morning believing the outcome was already decided. He was right. He just had the wrong outcome in mind. For his name was Conrad Ashby. And Conrad Ashby did not simply enter rooms, he occupied them. 63 years old, tall and broad in the way of men who were once genuinely athletic and now carry only the frame of it. Dark gray hair cut close and expensive. A bespoke suit, midnight blue, London-made 14-month waiting list that cost more than most people's cars. His watch, half hidden beneath the cuff, cost more than the combined annual salaries of every court officer in the building. He was the founder and chairman of Ashby Infrastructure Group. Toll roads, port facilities, freight terminals across 9 states. The kind of business most people never think about and cannot live without. His company had touched nearly $2 billion in government contracts over the past decade. His personal net worth, at least according to publicly available records, was $260 million. That last detail would become important. When he walked into courtroom 7 on a Tuesday morning in November, like a man who owned the building. Behind him came 2 attorneys from Halcourt, Finn, and Associates, the most expensive civil litigation firm in the region. Each carried a briefcase with combination locks. Each wore the expression of professionals who have already decided the outcome and are simply here to log it. His lead counsel was Peter Strand. 55. Silver at the temples. A jaw built for television and a reputation built on courtroom precision. He had spent 20 years making complex marital estates disappear, and the arithmetic always favored his clients. As they settled at the respondents' table, Strand leaned close. "Let me drive today. You do not need to say a word unless I put you on the stand." Conrad did not look at him. He was looking at the woman across the aisle. "I say what I want, Peter. But that is why you charge me what you charge me." Strand said nothing. He had been paid too much for too long to argue with Conrad Ashby about anything. And what Strand did not say, what he would think about later, in a very different room, under very different circumstances, was that Conrad's need to perform had always been his most dangerous quality. Across the courtroom, at the petitioner's table, sat a woman who seemed to have arrived from a different world entirely. But her name was Naomi Ashby, 45 years old. Dark hair pulled back simply, a gray blazer over a white blouse, clean, pressed, but not expensive. Small pearl earrings. No other jewelry. Her hands were folded on the table, fingers laced, knuckles white with the effort of keeping still. She sat alone. No attorney, no family in the gallery, no friend offering silent support. Just Naomi. a single manila envelope on the table in front of her, and a quality of stillness that belonged to people who had learned to make themselves small in order to survive proximity to something large. She had been married to Conrad Ashby for 17 years. She had never once raised her voice at him. She would not raise it today. But something about the way she was sitting, the particular stillness of it, the way her eyes moved through the room with a calm that did not match the rest of her, did not quite fit the picture Conrad had drawn of her. As if anyone had been paying close enough attention, they might have noticed that. No one was. Not yet. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Osei. The courtroom stood as one. Judge Osei entered. 58. A Ghanaian-American woman with natural hair going silver at the crown and reading glasses on a beaded chain. 19 years on the bench. She moved without ceremony, took her seat, and opened the case file with the efficiency of a surgeon picking up a familiar instrument. Be seated. A pause. We are here in the matter of Ashby versus Ashby. Dissolution of marriage, equitable division of assets, determination of spousal support. She looked up. Mr. Strand, you are representing the respondent? Yes, Your Honor. Peter Strand for Conrad Ashby. Ms. Ashby, you are representing yourself today? Naomi rose slowly. Yes, Your Honor. I need you to speak up throughout these proceedings. Yes, Your Honor. Louder, but still small, for Judge Osei studied her for a moment before returning to the file. 19 years on the bench had taught her to read a room the way others read a clock, instantly, without effort, and with an accuracy that rarely failed. She had seen this arrangement before. The fortified legal army on one side, the solitary figure on the other. She knew, statistically, how these cases ended, but she had also learned, over 19 years, that statistics were not stories, and something about this particular story did not feel finished. Mr. Strand, your opening statement. Strand rose with the ease of a man who has done this 10,000 times. He painted Conrad Ashby in broad, confident strokes, the self-made visionary, the relentless builder, the man who had turned a single port facility lease into a 9-state empire over 30 years of sacrifice and singular intelligence. And then he painted Naomi. Mrs. Ashby has been a homemaker for the duration of this 17-year marriage. No professional qualifications, no employment history after the marriage, no independent income, no assets in her own name. She has been, in the simplest terms, wholly dependent on my client's generosity. A pause. There were no children from this union. The household was managed entirely by paid staff, a domestic manager, 2 housekeepers, a private chef on retainer. Mrs. Ashby's role within that household was, to be precise, undefined. A woman in the gallery shifted. My client proposes a lump sum settlement of $1.5 million. He believes this is generous. He sat down. $1.5 million against $260 million. It was not a number. It was a message. Naomi stood for her response. Your Honor, I simply ask that the law be followed. Community property. A fair accounting of everything accumulated during this marriage. Nothing more than what belongs to me under the law. Conrad turned to Strand with the ghost of a smile. She wanted her moment, he would say later at lunch. I let her have it. It will not matter. He was right, for now. But here is what Conrad Ashby did not know as he settled into his chair that morning. He did not know what Naomi had done on a rainy highway 19 years before he had ever met her. He did not know who she had saved. And he had absolutely no idea that the person she had saved was, at that precise moment, boarding a flight. The respondent calls Conrad Ashby. Conrad walked to the stand as though approaching a podium at a business conference. He was sworn in, composed himself with practiced ease, and folded his hands. Strand walked him through the history of Ashby Infrastructure Group. Every acquisition, every risk, every contract won through sheer force of vision. But he used the word "I" with the frequency and weight of a hammer. And during the marriage, did your wife contribute to the business in any operational capacity? Conrad glanced at Naomi. She was looking at the table. Naomi attended a handful of industry dinners early in our marriage. As the company grew, she withdrew. She preferred her garden, her books, her smaller world. Did she contribute financially? No. Everything she had came from me. In your view, what constitutes a fair settlement? Conrad looked directly at Naomi for the first time. $1.5 million is generous. It reflects what I owe her, which is nothing, with a margin of decency applied on top. The gallery made a sound, not a gasp. The thing that precedes one. Your witness, Mrs. Ashby. Naomi stood. She held a single sheet of paper, handwriting small and careful. She approached Conrad the way someone approaches a stove they are not certain is still hot. Conrad, on bid. You came home and did not speak for bid. You came home and did not speak for 3 days. On the 4th night, you sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. and told me you were going to walk away from everything. Her voice was very level. Do you remember that night? Conrad's jaw tightened fractionally. Mrs. Ashby, Judge Osei said, please keep your questions relevant to the division of assets. I am, Your Honor. I am trying to establish the nature of my contribution. She turned back to Conrad. I sat with you until sunrise. I told you the bid had failed because you had proposed the wrong terminal access structure. I had spent 4 years reading the County Commission's meeting minutes because you did not have time to, and I knew what they actually needed. I wrote it out for you. You rebuilt the bid around what I wrote. You won the Galveston contract 6 weeks later. The room was very quiet. That contract was worth $47 million. Every major expansion you made over the next decade came through relationships and references built on Galveston. I am simply noting, for the record, that my contribution was not ceremonial. Conrad's voice was cold steel. You read some documents. I did the work. I read them because you trusted me to. Naomi. He said her name like a door being closed. Being useful once does not make you a partner. You were a comfort, an accessory. On my best days, a useful one. That is the truth, and you know it. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and something crossed her face that was not quite hurt. It was almost like confirmation. She sat back down. Your Honor, I believe there are assets that have not been disclosed. Accounts and holdings I was never given access to. I cannot produce documentation because he controlled all of it, but I know they exist. Mrs. Ashby, do you have documented evidence? No, Your Honor, not yet. Not yet. Judge Osei repeated the words quietly, as if she were filing them somewhere. Then we proceed based on the disclosures submitted. Conrad walked back to his table. He leaned toward Strand and said it quietly. She has nothing. She still has nothing. It will not matter. By the lunch recess, the case had the shape of a foregone conclusion. Conrad's accountant, a composed man named Stuart Briggs, had testified for 90 minutes about the completeness of the financial disclosures. Tax returns, property records, corporate filings, balance sheets. All of it confirmed exactly what Conrad wanted confirmed. Naomi tried to cross-examine him. She did not know where to look for the cracks. She was not supposed to. That was precisely how Conrad had arranged it. But we will recess until 2 o'clock. Conrad left for a private dining room 2 blocks away. Wagyu. A bottle of something old and red. Laughter. Ease. Naomi did not leave. The bailiff, a woman named Denise, 30 years in this building, stopped by the table. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" Naomi looked up. "No, thank you." She sat alone in the empty courtroom, hands folded, eyes quiet, waiting. But what Denise could not have known, what no one in that building knew, was that Naomi had been waiting for much longer than this morning, and that the thing she had been waiting for was about 40 minutes away. He believed that morning had ended exactly as planned. He was right about the morning. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that 40 minutes away, a woman had just cleared security at Dulles International. She had a briefcase. A dark, cognac leather briefcase, on old and well-traveled, that she had carried into 41 courtrooms across 19 years. And she had been waiting for this particular day for a very long time. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. And tell me, have you ever been the quietest person in a room that had already decided the outcome? The courtroom refilled at 10 minutes before 2. Conrad returned carrying the warmth of a good lunch and the particular confidence that expensive wine gives to men who already have too much of it. The gallery was fuller than it had been that morning. Word travels fast in courthouses. A case that looked simple at 9 a.m. had acquired, through some atmospheric alchemy, the quality of something worth watching. Courthouse staff. A pair of law clerks on their lunch break. A third-year law student who had been told, by her professor, to come and observe. Naomi was already in her seat. Of course. At 2 o'clock, Judge Osei returned. "Mr. Strand, you have additional witnesses?" "Yes, Your Honor. The respondent calls—" He never finished the sentence, because at that exact moment the doors opened. Both of them. At once. The sound they made carried through the chamber like the first strike of something very large, a single resonant impact that turned every head in the room at the same instant. A woman entered, not tall in the way of people who try to appear tall. Simply tall. 5'11", perhaps 6 feet in the low-heeled shoes she wore. A West African woman, early 60s, natural hair gone entirely silver and worn close to her head like something deliberately chosen. Her suit was the color of iron, deep, dark gray that absorbed the courtroom's fluorescent light without returning it. Every seam exact, every line intentional. In her right hand, a briefcase the color of dark cognac leather, old, well-traveled. The kind of object that accumulates authority the way certain buildings do. Not through newness, but through everything it has witnessed. But it was not what she looked like. It was the way she moved. She walked down the center aisle without hesitation, without looking left or right, without acknowledging the turning heads. Her pace was not fast. It was absolute. The pace of someone who has never once, in her adult life, entered a room and wondered whether she belonged in it. At the gate separating the gallery from the court, she did not pause. She pushed through, walked directly to Naomi's table, and set her briefcase down with a sound like a sentence being completed. And she spoke. Her voice filled the room without effort. Not loud, simply clear. "I apologize for the delay, Your Honor. My flight from Washington was held on the tarmac for 40 minutes. But the airline's explanation was unconvincing." Judge Osei had removed her reading glasses. She was staring at the woman with an expression that, in 19 years on the bench, she had never quite worn before. "Counselor, are you entering an appearance in this matter?" "Yes, Your Honor." The woman produced a card and handed it to the bailiff. Vivien Cole, appearing as counsel for the petitioner, Naomi Ashby. The name moved through the courtroom the way a stone moves through still water. were concentric, expanding, unstoppable. The third-year law student who had been told to come and observe stood up. She stood up without realizing she had done it. Peter Strand looked like a man who had just been told the building was on fire. Conrad Ashby, who had not shown a genuine flicker of emotion in 4 hours of proceedings, went very still. Because Vivien Cole was not simply an attorney. She had clerked for 2 federal circuit judges before either had been willing to share her. She had built Cole, Adeyemi, and Partners from a 4-person boutique into a 60-attorney firm with offices in Washington, Chicago, Houston, and Lagos. She specialized in exactly one kind of case, the kind where one party had used money and complexity to bury the other, and where the truth required excavation. She had never lost a case she had personally tried. Not once. "Ms. Cole," Judge Osei said carefully, "you are entering a case that is already in progress. I reviewed the morning transcript on the flight. I am fully prepared, Your Honor." "Your Honor, this is completely irregular." Strand was on his feet. "Mrs. Ashby has been self-represented all morning. You cannot simply—" "Mr. Strand?" Judge Osei's voice carried precisely the temperature of deep space. "Ms. Cole is a licensed attorney who has entered a timely appearance. She is permitted to represent her client. Sit down." Strand sat, but Vivien had not looked at him once. She opened her briefcase, removed a slim document wallet, and turned to Naomi. She did not speak loudly. "I am here," she said. Naomi's breath caught. "You came all this way." "Of course I did." Vivien's hand covered Naomi's briefly. "1 second, no more. We will talk about everything else later. Right now we have work to do." She turned to face the court, and the room understood, without needing to be told, or that the day had just changed its shape. But here is what no one in that courtroom understood yet. The door's opening was not the real disruption. It was a signal. The real disruption had been building for 18 months, and it was 4 inches thick, and it was about to land on a judge's bench. Vivien Cole reached into her briefcase and produced a document stack bound with a black clip. She placed it on the table in front of her, with the calm of someone setting down something they have been carrying for a long time. "Your Honor, before Mr. Strand continues, I have preliminary motions." "Proceed." "I move to compel complete financial discovery. The disclosures submitted by the respondent are materially incomplete." Strand rose. "Your Honor, we have provided exhaustive—" "You have provided selected documentation, Mr. Strand." Vivien's voice did not rise, and it simply became more precise. "I have forensic evidence of 11 accounts held across 4 foreign jurisdictions in the names of entities controlled by your client. None appear in the disclosures submitted to this court." The courtroom went still. "I also have records of 6 properties, 4 domestic, 2 international, held in layered trust structures designed specifically to place them beyond the reach of marital estate calculation. And I have traced a systematic pattern of asset movement beginning 22 months ago, shortly after Mr. Ashby first consulted with divorce counsel, in which approximately $93 million was quietly relocated to structures designed to be invisible." Conrad had not moved, but the line of his jaw had changed. Just slightly. Vivien walked a bound report to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Osei. "There's 18 months of forensic investigation by Clearwater Financial Intelligence, cross-jurisdictional asset tracing, accounts indexed by institution and jurisdiction, trust structures diagrammed, transfer timeline starting on page 62. Judge Osei opened the report. The room watched her read it. Her expression did not change, but she turned pages more slowly as she went deeper. Conrad leaned toward Strand. Barely a whisper. "How does she have this?" Strand had no answer. Vivien, or from across the room, without turning. "I have this, Mr. Ashby, because I am very good at finding what people work hard to hide, and because people who hide things always believe their architecture is more invisible than it is." "Mr. Strand." Judge Osei had stopped reading. She set her glasses on the bench. "The account numbers in this report are real. The institutional names are real. Can you tell me right now that these accounts do not exist?" A long pause. I would need time to verify. "That is not what I asked." Another pause. "No, Your Honor. I cannot tell you that. I am issuing a temporary restraining order, effective immediately, freezing all assets in Mr. Ashby's name or under his direct or indirect control, including all corporate entities, trusts, and nominee structures. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. for a full evidentiary hearing." The gavel came down once. The courtroom broke open. Not into noise, into motion. Attorneys on phones before they cleared the door. Law clerks writing furiously. The gallery on its feet. Conrad sat completely still, staring at the woman who had walked through those doors 40 minutes ago and had, in 40 minutes, destroyed 2 years of careful preparation. Vivien packed her briefcase without hurry. She paused beside Naomi and spoke quietly. Naomi nodded, pressed her lips together, nodded again. As Vivien turned for the exit, she slowed beside Conrad's table. "Mr. Ashby, I would suggest using tonight wisely. What happened today was preliminary." She continued towards the doors. "Tomorrow is not." Her footsteps faded down the corridor, and the silence she left behind was a different kind of silence than the silence of the morning. This one was the sound of a man beginning to understand the shape of what was coming for him. But what Conrad did not understand yet, what he would not understand until he was sitting alone at midnight with his laptop, was the real reason Vivien Cole had come. Not the 93 million, not the offshore accounts, not the forensic report. Something that had happened on a highway in the dark 19 years ago. Something Naomi had never once mentioned. Not to him, not to anyone. He did not sleep. The penthouse, 31st floor, harbor view, $400,000 kitchen that had never been cooked in. Everything chosen by someone other than him. That night, it felt like a stage set with the audience gone. He paced. Called Strand, who sounded hollowed out and kept using words like criminal exposure and cooperation agreement. Called his contact in Zurich, who did not answer. Called his corporate counsel, who listened carefully and said very little. After midnight, he sat down. Opened his laptop. Typed her name. But Vivien Cole, attorney. Pages of results, profiles, case summaries, a long magazine piece, the architect of accountability, a legal journal retrospective that read more like a monument. He scrolled for an hour. Near the bottom of the 3rd page of results, something stopped him. A short article, not from a legal publication, a regional newspaper, Coastal State, published 19 years ago. Local woman credited with saving attorney's life in highway accident. He clicked it. A car had gone off an elevated highway in a storm. Blowout, wet road, guardrail failure. The vehicle came to rest upside down in a drainage channel 8 feet below the road. Driver trapped, channel flooding, complete darkness and hard rain. A woman driving home from a late shift at a residential care facility had seen the car leave the road. She stopped, climbed down the embankment in the rain. Found the driver, a 43-year-old attorney, got her leg pinned beneath the crumpled doorframe, and held her head above the rising water for 51 minutes until the fire department arrived. Then she stayed at the hospital. 3 days, sleeping in a waiting room chair, checking in with the nursing staff, making sure a stranger was going to be all right. Conrad read the name of the attorney who had been pulled from that ditch. Vivien Cole. He read the name of the woman who had saved her. Naomi Whitford, working the overnight shift at Harborview Care Home for $12 an hour, driving a 12-year-old car, his wife, before she was his wife. He sat with that for a long time. 17 years of marriage, 17 years of her listening while he spoke, of him deciding, incrementally, that she was less and less until finally she was nothing. And in all of that time, she had never mentioned this, never used it, not once, not as leverage, not as proof of her worth, not as a story she told at dinner parties to remind people she mattered. She had simply held it quietly, the way she held everything. He understood now how Vivien Cole had come to be in that courtroom. He understood it, and he could not undo the feeling that followed. He had spent 17 years building a cage around a woman who had once pulled a stranger from a flooding ditch in the dark, and the stranger had remembered. Morning arrived without ceremony. Conrad wore his best suit, the midnight blue one. He did not realize until he was in the car that it was the one Naomi had chosen for him, years ago for a contract signing that had opened 3 new states, when Strand met him outside the courthouse, quieter than yesterday. "We have a revised offer, $40 million, clean settlement, no admission." She walks away. "And if she says no?" Strand looked at the building. "Then we survive the day as best we can." Naomi was already in her seat. Same gray blazer, same pearl earrings. But she sat differently. The quality of her stillness had changed. It was no longer the stillness of someone trying to take up less space. It was the stillness of someone who has stopped needing to. Vivien sat beside her in a suit the color of deep charcoal, reviewing notes with the quiet attention of someone who has prepared so thoroughly that the preparation has become invisible. "Mr. Strand, have you reviewed the materials?" "We have, Your Honor. We would like to request a brief recess to explore settlement." "No settlement discussions." Vivien did not stand. "We are proceeding." Conrad leaned forward. "Or she has not even heard the offer." "I do not need to hear it." Vivien's voice held no heat, only precision. "No dollar amount amends what has been committed in this courtroom. No private agreement prevents this evidence from entering the public record. Mrs. Ashby is entitled to her day in court." "Proceed, Miss Cole." What followed was not dramatic. That was the thing that made it so devastating. No raised voices, no theatrical moments, no courtroom speeches designed for the gallery. Just evidence. Clean, authenticated, irrefutable evidence, presented one document at a time, in a room that grew quieter with each exhibit. Vivien called Thomas Reardon first, the lead forensic investigator from Clearwater Financial, 60 years old, patient, methodical. He had the manner of someone who finds deep pleasure in complex problems and even deeper pleasure in making the solution legible to others. He walked the court through 18 months of investigation. Wire transfers, the corporate structures, jurisdictional filings, account movements projected on a screen at the front of the room. The picture that assembled was of a man who had begun, 22 months ago, to quietly move money through shell entities in the British Virgin Islands, Singapore, and Luxembourg. Assets that belonged to the marital estate, steadily relocated to structures designed to be invisible to anyone who did not know precisely where to look. $93 million. But Strand objected repeatedly. Reardon answered each objection with the same precise calm. His methodology was documented. His conclusions were not opinion. They were arithmetic. But that was not the moment that changed everything. Then Vivien called Diana Kwan, former chief financial officer of Ashby Infrastructure Group, resigned 14 months ago. that her resignation letter, which Vivien had somehow obtained, cited irreconcilable ethical disagreements with senior leadership regarding financial reporting practices. Diana Kwan was 41 years old and had the demeanor of someone who has been rehearsing for this particular room for a long time. Mr. Ashby directed me to restructure approximately $60 million in operating income through management fee arrangements paid to entities he controlled personally, she testified. The effect was to reduce the reported value of the company for the purpose of the divorce valuation, while keeping the economic benefit to himself. And when you raised concerns? He told me my certainty about legality was not required, only my signature. And your response? I resigned. It took me 2 weeks to find the courage. I have spent 14 months wishing I had done it sooner. The courtroom had gone beyond visible reaction. It had entered a deep attentiveness. Was the quality of a room that understands it is witnessing something that cannot be undone. But even that was not the moment everything broke open. That came next. Vivien called Stuart Briggs to the stand, the accountant who had stood in this same courtroom the day before and testified, under oath, that every asset had been fully and accurately disclosed. He looked like a man who had not slept. Mr. Briggs, yesterday you testified that Mr. Ashby's disclosures were complete and accurate. Well, do you stand by that testimony? He looked at his hands. I testified to the information I was provided. I am asking whether your testimony was accurate. A long pause. There may have been holdings I was not fully informed of. Mr. Briggs. She set a sheet of paper on the railing in front of him. This is an email from your professional address to Mr. Ashby, dated 7 weeks ago. Please read the highlighted text aloud. He read it the way a man reads a sentence he hoped would never be spoken in public. Per your instruction, the Cayman accounts and associated holding structures have been excluded from the disclosure package. BVI entities are handled through the Singapore filing. Please confirm you wish to proceed on this basis. And Mr. Ashby's response? He confirmed. He said to proceed. The gallery released a sound like a long, slow exhale. Berstrand rose immediately. Your Honor, before this court draws any inference from that email, I would direct attention to Respondent's Exhibit 14, a legal opinion from Hartwell and Crane, a firm specializing in cross-jurisdictional tax structures. This opinion, dated 14 months ago, concludes that the offshore arrangements in question were established for entirely legitimate tax purposes, predating any divorce consultation by more than 3 years. What Ms. Cole is characterizing as concealment was, in fact, standard international tax planning. The email simply reflects Mr. Ashby's preference for keeping those lawfully established structures outside a disclosure that had no legal obligation to include them. He set the document on the clerk's desk. The email proves nothing except that my client communicated with his accountant. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Not with noise. But with the particular quality of silence that falls when an argument is suddenly credible. Judge Osei looked at Vivien. Vivien did not move. She did not look at the document. She looked at Briggs. Mr. Briggs, that legal opinion from Hartwell and Crane is dated 14 months ago. Her voice was completely level. The email you just read into this record, in which you confirm that the Cayman accounts and BVI entities were deliberately excluded from the court disclosure at Mr. Ashby's instruction, is dated 7 weeks ago. A pause. 7 weeks ago, Mr. Briggs, after these proceedings had already been filed, after full disclosure was already legally required. She let that land for exactly 1 second. Which document describes what actually happened in this courtroom yesterday? He looked at his hands. A long, terrible pause. The email. The room exhaled. Not a sound, exactly. Something deeper than a sound, on the release of something that had been held very tightly for a very short time. So when you testified yesterday that all assets had been fully disclosed, you knew that was untrue. I was following my client's instructions. You were committing perjury at your client's instruction, Mr. Briggs. Strand sat down without objecting. He had nothing left to object with. The lunch recess was brief and quiet. Conrad sat alone in a conference room. Strand came in, sat down. They told him the truth, the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis the patient has been avoiding. Total marital estate, including the hidden assets, is somewhere between 400 and 450 million. She gets half. That is community property law, and it is not negotiable. Conrad stared at the table. Before the criminal referrals, which are coming regardless of anything we do now, tax fraud, perjury committed in this courtroom, obstruction, the U.S. Attorney will be interested, or so will the IRS. Can we appeal? Appeal what? The evidence is authentic. The witnesses are credible. You lied under oath, and the lie has been documented. There is nothing to appeal. Strand stood. I am withdrawing from this case. I have an ethical obligation to report what I now know. I am sorry, Conrad. He left. The bailiff knocked 10 minutes later. Court was resuming. Conrad Ashby walked back into the courtroom alone. For the first time in 17 years, but he was completely alone. And the worst part of the afternoon, the absolute worst part, had not happened yet. Vivien called Naomi to the stand. Naomi walked to the witness box slowly and sat down. When she looked at Vivien, her expression held a quality of quiet trust that made several people in the gallery look away from it. It was too private a thing to witness from a distance. Naomi, how long were you married to Conrad Ashby? 17 years. During that marriage, were you aware of the offshore accounts and hidden structures? Not in detail. I knew money moved in ways I was not told about. I had no access to financial records beyond a household account. Did you ask? Several times over the years. He told me it was complex and that I would not understand it. After a while, I stopped asking. A pause. I understand now that the asking was the point. Every time I stopped asking, something became easier for him. The room was very still. When did you know the marriage was ending? About 2 years before he filed. The contempt had always been there in small ways, but 2 years ago it became consistent, deliberate, as if he had made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. What did you do when you received the divorce papers? I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I had $11,000 in a household account. No access to financial records, no documentation of anything. I had been inside his world for 17 years, and he had arranged it so that none of it existed in my name. She paused. And then I remembered something. The courtroom leaned in. A woman I had helped. Before I met Conrad. She had told me something I had never forgotten, though I never imagined I would need it. Was ashamed to. Ms. Cole, proceed. Vivien pressed play. Conrad's voice came through the speaker. Small, flat, without the physical presence that normally gave it weight. The offshore accounts need to be completely dark for the disclosure. If she manages to find an attorney, a real one, those accounts end everything. Strand's voice. Conrad, what you are describing is fraud. If this comes out, it will not come out. Naomi has been in a box for 17 years. She does not know what questions to ask. She has no contacts, no resources, no way to find anyone who could help her. She is completely isolated. A pause on the recording. That was not an accident. Another pause. I made sure of it. The recording stopped, and the courtroom held its silence for a full 4 seconds. Judge Osei removed her glasses, folded them, set them on the bench. And when she looked at Conrad Ashby, her expression contained something that 19 years on the bench had distilled into its purest, coldest form. Not anger, not contempt. Judgment. "Mr. Ashby, stand up." He stood. The midnight blue suit that had felt like armor at 8 in the morning was, by 3 in the afternoon, simply cloth. "Now, I have presided over this bench for 19 years, Judge Osei said. Her voice was level and exact, the way cold is level and exact. "I have witnessed financial misconduct of considerable sophistication. I have seen cruelty in many forms. What has been documented in this courtroom today, the systematic concealment of marital assets, the suborning of perjury, the deliberate and engineered isolation of a spouse to prevent her from exercising her legal rights, and the explicit acknowledgement, on your own recording, that this isolation was intentional, represents one of the most calculated acts of injustice I have encountered on this bench." She opened her legal pad. "I am finding that the total marital estate, including all disclosed and previously concealed assets, amounts to approximately $431 million. Conrad's hand, resting on the table, closed slowly into a fist. "Mrs. Ashby is entitled to 1/2. $215,500,000. A sound from the gallery, quickly suppressed, but real. "I am further ordering spousal support of $180,000 per month for 12 years, or until Mrs. Ashby chooses to remarry. Mr. Ashby will bear full responsibility for Mrs. Ashby's legal fees and all costs associated with the forensic investigation." She looked up. "I am referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office and the District Attorney for criminal prosecution. Perjury committed in this courtroom, tax fraud across multiple jurisdictions, obstruction, conspiracy to defraud a spouse of legally protected marital assets. The evidence is overwhelming, and it will be transmitted today." A final pause. "You will surrender your passport before leaving this building. Any attempt to transfer, liquidate, or conceal remaining assets will constitute contempt and will be treated accordingly." The gavel came down. And the world Conrad Ashby had built, over 30 years, through relentless work and equally relentless compromise of everything that did not serve him, began to come apart. Not slowly. The way a structure fails when its central load-bearing element is removed, it came apart all at once, and he surrendered his passport at the clerk's desk on the ground floor before the building had fully emptied. Dark blue cover, gold federal seal, 37 countries stamped across its pages, port deals in Rotterdam, freight negotiations in Singapore, terminal contracts in Antwerp. 30 years of a life conducted at scale, compressed into a small booklet. When the clerk, a young woman who had processed thousands of documents in this building and would process thousands more, took it without ceremony, placed it in a manila envelope, sealed it, filed it. Conrad stood at that desk for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he walked out through the lobby and stood on the courthouse steps alone. November. Cold. The city he had spent 3 decades shaping stretched in every direction. None of it looked back. For the weeks that followed moved like water finding its level. Investors in Ashby Infrastructure Group began their exit before the week was out. Institutional partners invoked contractual provisions tied to criminal proceedings and withdrew. Port authorities suspended contracts pending review. The federal investigation was opened within 10 days and expanded quickly. The Singapore entities had uses beyond concealing marital assets, and the DOJ found them interesting. The Stewart Briggs entered into a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. Diana Kwan testified before a grand jury. Peter Strand, who had withdrawn and self-reported to the bar, was questioned anyway. Cooperation agreements have broad definitions in federal proceedings. Ashby Infrastructure Group was placed in receivership 4 months after the ruling. The toll roads kept operating. The freight terminals kept processing cargo. And the infrastructure did not care about the man who had built it. It simply kept functioning under new management. Conrad Ashby was indicted on 11 counts. His new attorneys were competent. They were not exceptional. And Vivien Cole, whose name now appeared in 3 separate federal case files as the attorney whose investigation had initiated the proceedings, was back in Washington before the week ended. She had other work. She always had other work. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building near the water. Not a famous building. Not an address that announced anything. A building with a deep-set entrance and a doorman named Felix, who had worked there for 22 years and greeted everyone exactly the same way. Naomi had chosen it herself. The apartment was not large, but every room had windows. And in the mornings, when the light came off the harbor and moved across the wooden floors, it did something to the space that no amount of money could replicate. She was standing in the living room on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after the ruling, watching 2 women from a moving company carry in a bookshelf she had ordered from a craftsman in Vermont. Solid oak, deep shelves, exactly deep enough for the oversized architecture books she had loved for years and never allowed herself to own because Conrad found them cluttered. Vivien was in the kitchen making coffee. She had flown in the evening before. No case attached to the visit. She brought 2 cups into the living room and stood beside Naomi. They watched the movers position the shelf against the wall. "The shelf is perfect," Vivien said. "I have been thinking about it for 3 years," Naomi said. After a while, Vivien spoke again. "I never properly thanked you for that road, that night. You have thanked me many times. Not for this." Vivien looked at the room, on the morning light on the floor, the shelf being bolted to the wall. "Not for all of this." Naomi was quiet for a moment. "I remember thinking, someone is down there, and the only question was whether I was going to help or keep driving." "It was 51 minutes in the rain," Vivien said, "in a drainage ditch, in the dark." "You needed someone." Naomi looked at her. "That is the whole story." Vivien was quiet for a long moment. "Conrad said something on that recording," she said finally. "He said he had made sure you were isolated, that it was not an accident." "I know. How long did you know?" Naomi looked at the morning light on the floor. "Long enough," she said. "Long enough to keep quiet. Long enough to wait. Long enough to understand that a man who controls everything eventually forgets that he cannot control everything. Long enough to make one phone call, and to trust completely, and that the person on the other end would answer. If stories like this move something in you, stories about the people nobody saw coming, subscribe now. You will want to be here for what comes next. Conrad Ashby walked into that courtroom, certain the outcome was already written. He had the money. He had the lawyers. He had 2 years of careful preparation, and he had 17 years of practice at treating the woman beside him as though she were invisible. That last part. When that was the thing that destroyed him. Not the forensic accountant, not the recording, not the witnesses who had spent a year waiting for their moment. Those were instruments. The real cause was simpler. He had spent 17 years making sure Naomi had nothing. No money of her own, no professional network, no documentation of anything, no way out. He had been meticulous about it. He said so himself. On tape, without shame. I made sure of it. But what he had not considered, what men like Conrad Ashby almost never consider, is that isolation is not the same as invisibility. that a quiet person is not the same as an unobserving one, that a woman with no resources is not the same as a woman with no memory. Naomi Ashby spent 17 years inside a cage that had been carefully constructed around her, and she spent 17 years watching everything, remembering everything, saying nothing, waiting. And 19 years before any of this began, she had stopped on a highway in the rain, climbed down into the dark, and held a stranger's head above water until help arrived. Not for leverage, not for reward. Because someone needed her, that is the entire story. Kindness given freely, without ledger, without expectation, without even the thought of return, has a way of coming back. Not as luck, not as coincidence, as the simple, but compounding truth that the people we help do not forget. And when the moment comes, they answer before the second ring. The people you underestimate the most are almost always the ones paying the closest attention. Conrad Ashby had 17 years to learn that. He spent every one of them looking the other way. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.